thousands of bowings. They stand up, they kneel down, prostrate themselves on the floor, get up again, stand up, kneel down, prostrate them on the floor. And there are those Tibetan monks who do the Longpa, running through the mountain trails with enormous leaps. And they do like Nijinsky would do those leaps where you pause a little bit here and think, well, come gravity and then drop again. And they go on and on and on, bouncing along the road. And there are the pilgrims who prostrate themselves at every step, traveling a long journey. There are people who run the streets of Kyoto, 100 miles from Kyoto every day, at a jog trot. There are all kinds of things like that, where you work yourself to a limit in struggle. Because in doing that, you get a thing which runners call second wind. And second wind in running is where you are no longer running, but it runs you. Where, in other words, the ego energy in the running is displaced, and the energy of the whole organism takes over. And that is all the energy of the whole universe. And you get second wind. So you get second wind in this fierce kind of meditation. Alternatively, there's another way in. And in this way is a kind of so-called easy way. And one uses it for a different type of personality. There are certain people who must have the difficult way because they don't know they exist unless they're sitting on a spike. And those kind of people who don't believe they're real unless they hurt have to follow the difficult way. But there is a subtle way, which is the Taoistic approach, wherein instead of trying to master and dominate your body-mind, you let go of it. And you let it do whatever it wants to do. Let's suppose, for the sake of example for a moment, you just close your eyes and allow your eardrums to respond to proper sound or improper sound. You may feel free to shift, shuffle, cough, sneeze as you will. Don't try to identify, locate, or name the sounds that you hear. Just let the rippling air play with your eardrum. And as you hear the sound of my voice coming across to you, listen to what I have to say simply as tones. Your brain will take care of understanding. You don't try to understand. In other words, allow your ears to hear anything they want to hear. And to assist you in this, keep your tongues relaxed in the lower jaw. Listening to every sound in the whole field of air vibrations, as you would listen to music, as you would listen to Bach or Ravi Shankar, without trying to see any meaning. There is no hurry. This is what there is. Well, now, of course, one can do that through all the senses, not just the ears, but the body feeling, skin contact, the breath, sense of smell, taste, and also, of course, the eyes. It's more difficult to do it with the eyes, because our culture, as Marshall McLuhan has pointed out, is excessively visual. And because of the Gutenberg galaxy, because of making sense out of print and the enormous valuation placed on literacy, we've overbalanced one sense, which is the visual sense. When we say to somebody, you smell, that's uncomplimentary. We should say, of course, director, you stink. If we mean you have a bad smell. But everything connected with smell is repressed. And therefore, because we still continue to smell, it is an unconscious sense through which we relate to each other in ways that we don't know. You take an instinctive liking to someone because you like the smell, but you don't know that. You take an instinctive dislike to someone because you don't like the smell, but you don't know that. All sorts of things, all sorts of messages are passed through the nose, but we're not aware of them. We don't have an adequate vocabulary of smell. Only 3 adjectives in English are associated with smell uniquely: acrid, pungent, fragrant. All the others are associated with borrowed from other senses. Think how many adjectives we have for vision, for sound, for taste. Although taste, of course, is inseparable from smell. So, the second way of meditation, which I was demonstrating to you, allowing your ears to hear whatever they want to hear. In the same way, you allow your breath to breathe any way it wants to breathe. You allow your muscle, skin, tone, feeling, the sense of touch, to feel any way it wants to feel. You allow your eyes to see anything they want to see. And finally, you allow your mind to think anything it wants to think. Let it go. This is the relaxed way. The other way is the tense way. They come to the same conclusion. You go around this way, take the right-hand path and go there, take the left-hand path and go there. I'm not going to evaluate between one and the other. It's up to the individual. But the way Charlotte and I have been interested in for a long time is the way which is natural, which doesn't force things, and which lets the organism, with its own inner sense of what is correct, do it by itself. So, if you will let your mind, alone, you don't try to concentrate it, you don't try to discipline it, whatever it wants to do. Whatever thoughts want to flow through your head, let them flow. Don't try either to get with them and make something of it, and don't try to stop them. Just let them go. Besides, who are you? As distinct from your thoughts, as distinct from your visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory sensations. Who might intervene and say, you do otherwise? Because when we get that terrific split between our experience, our feelings, our sensations, on the one hand, and on the other, something called the experiencer, the control agent who has and who directs all these things, there's the root of our trouble. Because we are confusing ourselves with an image of ourselves. And under those circumstances, we define the living organism as a material object. The body, which corrupts, and which is somehow antithetical to spirit. Not realizing that the idea of the body as something antithetical to spirit is purely a conception. This is not a conception. And as we see it now from the standpoint of 20th century quantum physics, it's a shimmering phenomenon of electrical energy. It's a light show. This isn't what we used to think of as physical at all. Block, chunky stuff. It's a zizzing dance. It's like fire. That's the meaning of the Buddhist figure Fudo. This guy with a sword in one hand and a rope in the other, with a fierce face and flames all around. Fudo means immovable. He is showing you everything is fine. It's like I said this morning, a flame. It seems to be a flame. A flame, a thing that sticks in one position. So Fudo, this flaming god, the sword, which cuts out all entanglements, and the rope. I don't know what the rope's for. Maybe just for wiggling. He cuts loose our conceptions. You don't want any other gurus in competition with you, because that's taking away the business. I had a very funny adventure in Thailand. I was wandering around in a temple, and I was sort of looking, my gaze was cast downwards, and I suddenly came across a bookstall. And there was a book on the kind of meditation they do in Southern Buddhism. And I said, oh, I was just sort of talking out loud to myself, that must be Satipatthana. And the voice said, you practice Satipatthana? And I looked up, and there was a yellow-robed man who spoke English, standing in charge of the bookstall. He's kind of red-eyed. And I looked at him and said, well, not exactly. I practice Zen. Oh, Zen, not Satipatthana. Well, I said, it's all kind of the same thing. It's like yoga. No, Satipatthana, not yoga. Now listen, I said, you Buddhists are supposed to be open-minded and to believe that there are many, many ways of realization. No, Satipatthana, only correct way. Well, I said, you talk like a Roman Catholic. They say they have the only true way. I said, you know what you like? You've got a ferry boat concession. It's a ferry boat concession. You can take a ferry across the river. And a few miles down the river, somebody else opens up a ferry boat. And you complain to the police and the government. Say, he shouldn't open up because he's in competition with me. Now, the truth of the matter is this. I'm talking still about the economics of spirituality. In London, there's a street called Harley Street, where every eminent physician and surgeon wants to have an office. This was years ago. And so Harley Street became completely full with physicians and surgeons. As you would say naturally, they were all in competition with each other. But nothing of the kind happened. They all became equally prosperous. So that they had to open up Wimpy, which was the next college. When they filled that up, they opened up Wimpy, which ran along next to it. And when they filled that up, they got Queen Anne Street, which ran parallel. And the whole area is nothing but physicians, surgeons, and dentists. And they're all fantastically prosperous because they've got the right address. See, once you've got into Harley Street, you're there. So it's like you're a guru, and you set up in Sausalito or Big Sur or Hollywood, whatever, you're in the right place. And we can take any number. And the more we have, the more prosperous everybody will be. This is the economics of plenty. And it's all based, you see, if you really work it right, it's based on a big turnover. You don't try to capture people. You don't try to make them faithful to you. You don't want to tie them up. But you see, if you do that and you set them all free, you really get them going. That's what you're supposed to do. That's your job. To liberate. And then they're grateful and they send their friends to you. So, the craft of mysticism. You see, I just want to be very frank with you because after all, you pay to come to these seminars. And in India, it's considered very, very immoral to ask for money for spiritual teaching. But that's a different culture from ours. In the United States, it would be immoral not to ask money. Because in the United States, people disrespect anything they get free. And they have to give money as a token of their sincerity, just as, say, in India or in China, you have to give something else. You have to wait a long time. You have to be persistent in token of your sincerity. But in this country, the hang-up is money. So naturally, one asks for money. A person like myself only needs a relatively small amount of money. And so, if you make an awful lot of it by being a successful guru, you give the rest away. Or do something creative and imaginative. Allen Ginsberg has a foundation. He makes a great deal of money by being a crazy poet. And he gives all that he doesn't need to help other poets. So then, the point I'm making is this. Meditation, you are not trying to gain anything. To alter your state of mind from what it is now into some other state which you think it ought to be in. You are centering in where you are. But you see, the difficulty for us with this is that we do everything. We even eat, we play, we dance, under the fundamental assumptions that all this is good for us. We go to concerts to improve our culture, to the theater, to the movie, in order to be able to say we have become more educated. We have improved. And as a result of this kind of motivation, we don't really do those things at all. If you go to the concert to become more cultured, you are not really listening. So meditation, above all things, because it's got a slightly disciplinary flavor to it, a slightly religious flavor to it, is something that people use somehow to get ahead in the game of spiritual one-upmanship. And I get sick and tired of people who go and study Zen and come back and brag about the long hours of meditation they put in and how much their legs hurt and what a great ordeal it was and how good it was for them and how you who haven't gone through this discipline are a kind of underling. See, I've had this put on me for years because I didn't go to Japan. I didn't sit around in zendos and worked it my own way. And they say, well, you are just a dilettante. See, you haven't suffered as much as we have. And you really ought to suffer. You ought to have those long endurance tests. Now, the reason why in meditation one sits in a certain way, whether you sit like I'm sitting now, or whether you sit in the lotus posture, your legs become a little uncomfortable. And the reason for that is not self-punitive. It's merely that it helps you to stay awake. That's all. And if you were floated in a hot tub with supporters in a completely dark room, in a sensory deprivation chamber, you would very likely go to sleep. But the point in meditation is to be wide awake. Without, however, the intellectual change. And so a posture which involves a very certain subordinate degree of discomfort keeps you awake. Actually, when you get used to sitting this way, I can sit this way without extreme discomfort for at least 40 minutes, even longer. And it becomes natural. As I explained, the point is to be wide awake and aware of your total sensory input without confusing it with the symbolic world, words and concepts, so that you experience life naked and directly. Experience you naked and directly, without having in your head the concept of who you are as a role player, as a personality, as an ego. And this becomes, in due course, a very pleasant thing to do. So that meditation becomes not something that you put in so much time at, like you might put in time in a jail, but becomes a pleasure. Of course, from the point of view of our religion in the United States, that's almost sinful. Religion isn't supposed to be a pleasure, because it's supposed to be joining with Christ in suffering on the cross. Look, there's enough inevitable suffering going on anyhow. You're going to die one of these days. Everybody encounters difficulties in their lives. You don't need to go out of your way to seek them. So now, there are two fundamental approaches to meditation. One, you see this morning, Charlotte was getting us to bounce on our heels and to stretch as tightly as we could to overcome gravity. And then after that, she said, see what happens when you don't do it. So one of the methods of meditation is to stretch as tightly as possible. To concentrate with your whole energy on a point. And to use the maximum amount of effort. You say in yoga there's an exercise called kumbha, which is a way of breathing, which is it's a kind of force, holding the breath as long and as tightly as you can. That was like the stretching we did. That's like those people who, let's say, in the Tendai temple on Mount Hiei over Kyoto, who practice bowing. Thousands and thousands of bowings. They stand up, they get down and prostrate themselves on the floor, get up again, stand up, kneel down, prostrate them on the floor. And there are those Tibetan monks who do the Nungongpa, running through the mountain trails with enormous leaps. And they do like Nijinsky could do those leaps where, you pause a little bit in the air and seem to overcome gravity and then drop again. And they go on and on and on, bouncing along a road. Or there are other pilgrims who prostrate themselves at every step, traveling a long journey. There are people who run the streets of Kyoto, 100 miles through the streets of Kyoto every day, at a jog trot. There are all kinds of things like that, where you work yourself to a limit in struggle. Because in doing that, you get a thing which runners call second wind. And second wind in running is where you are no longer running, but it runs you. Where, in other words, the ego energy in the running is displaced and the energy of the whole organism takes over. And that is all the energy of the whole universe. And you get second wind. So you get second wind in this fierce kind of meditation. Alternatively, there's another way in. And in this way is a kind of so-called easy way. And one uses it for a different type of personality. There are certain people who must have the difficult way because they don't know they exist unless they're sitting on a spike. And those kind of people who don't believe they're real unless they hurt have to follow the difficult way. But there is a subtle way, which is the Taoistic approach, wherein instead of trying to master and dominate your body-mind, you let go of it. And you let it do whatever it wants to do. Let's suppose, for the sake of example for a moment, you just close your eyes and allow your eardrums to respond to any sound going on. There are no proper sounds or improper sounds. You may feel free to shift, shuffle, cough, sneeze as you will. Don't try to identify, locate, or name the sounds that you hear. Just let the rippling air play with your eardrum. And as you hear the sound of my voice coming across to you, listen to what I have to say simply as tones. Your brain will take care of understanding. You don't try to understand. In other words, allow your ears to hear anything they want to hear. And to assist you in this, keep your tongues relaxed in the lower jaw. Listening to every sound in the whole field of air vibrations, as you would listen to music, as you would listen to Bach or Ravi Shankar, without trying to see any meaning. is no hurry. This is what there is. Well, now, of course, one can do that through all the senses, not just the ears, but the body feeling, skin contact, the breath, sense of smell, taste, and also, of course, the eyes. It's more difficult to do it with the eyes because our culture, as Marshall McLuhan has pointed out, is excessively visual. And because of the Gutenberg galaxy, because of making sense out of print and the enormous valuation placed on literacy, we've overbalanced one sense, which is the visual sense. When we say to somebody, you smell, that's uncomplimentary. We should say, of course, directly, you stink, if we mean you have a bad smell. But everything connected with smell is repressed. And therefore, because we still continue to smell, it is an unconscious sense through which we relate to each other in ways that we don't know. You take an instinctive liking to someone because you like the smell, but you don't know that. You take an instinctive dislike to someone because you don't like the smell, but you don't know that. All sorts of things, all sorts of messages are passed through the nose, but we're not aware of it. We don't have an adequate vocabulary of smell. Only 3 adjectives in English are associated with smell uniquely: acrid, pungent, fragrant. All the others are associated with borrowed from other senses. Think how many adjectives we have for vision, for sound, for taste. Although taste, of course, is inseparable from smell. So, the second way of meditation, which I was demonstrating to you, allowing your ears to hear whatever they want to hear. In the same way, you allow your breath to breathe any way it wants to breathe. You allow your muscle, skin feeling, the sense of touch, to feel any way it wants to feel. You allow your eyes to see anything they want to see. And finally, you allow your mind to think anything it wants to think. Let it go. This is the relaxed way. The other way is the tense way. They come to the same conclusion. You go around this way, take the right-hand path and go there, take the left-hand path and go there. I'm not going to evaluate between one and the other. It's up to the individual. But the way Charlotte and I have been interested in for a long time is the way which is natural, which doesn't force things, and which lets the organism, with its own inner sense of what is correct, do it by itself. So, if you will let your mind, alone, you don't try to concentrate it, you don't try to discipline it, you merely let it do whatever it wants to do. Whatever thoughts want to flow through your head, let them flow. Don't try either to get with them and make something of it, and don't try to stop them. Just let them go. Besides, who are you? As distinct from your thoughts, as distinct from your visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory sensations. Who might intervene and say, you do otherwise? Because when we get that terrific split between our experience, our feelings, our sensations, on the one hand, and on the other, something called the experiencer, the control agent who has and who directs all these things, there's the root of our trouble. Because we are confusing ourselves with an image of ourselves. And under those circumstances, we define the living organism as a material object. The body, which corrupts, and which is somehow antithetical to spirit. something that the idea of the body as something antithetical to spirit is purely a conception. This is not a conception. And as we see it now from the standpoint of 20th century quantum physics, it's a shimmering phenomenon of electrical energy. It's a light show. This isn't what we used to think of as physical at all. You know, block, chunky stuff. It's a zizzing dance. It's like fire. That's the meaning of the Buddhist figure Fudo. This guy with a sword in one hand and a rope in the other, with a fierce face and flames all around. Fudo means immovable. He is showing you everything is fine. It's like I said this morning, a flame. It seems to be a flame. A flame, made with sticks in one position. So Fudo, this flaming god, with the sword, which cuts off all entanglements, and the rope. I don't know what the rope's for. Maybe just for wiggling. He cuts loose our conceptions so that we can see this all too solid flesh dissolve. Now, if everybody's comfortable, we can get started. I've announced that this seminar is to be about the cosmic network. And therefore, we've got to spend the first evening understanding something about the nature of networks. Because in order to get the principle of a network across, I have to convey to you an idea which is extremely simple, but which is difficult to grasp only because we're not used to it. We are used to thinking as Westerners, as having a certain kind of language, and therefore a certain kind of logic that goes with it. We're used to thinking of the world in terms of a game of billiards. In other words, we are still thinking about our psychology, our bodies, and their relationship to the outside world in terms of what would scientifically be called Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics has a very long history because it goes back to some of the atomic theories of people like Democritus, who were among the great pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece. And so we may as well begin with a little bit about the history of the idea of an atom, because this has always fascinated people. What is the world fundamentally? What is all this? Well, one way of finding out is to take a knife and chop something in two, so you can see what's inside it. What is an apple inside? What is a seed inside? What is a human body inside? And then you find that when you chop a thing in two, you've got two pieces, but the cutting reveals that it has a structure inside. And the structure is composed of what we call organs or parts. And then in turn, in order to inquire into them, we take them and we chop them apart. And in our curiosity to find out how it's made, in just the same way that a child will take a toy to pieces, we chop and chop and chop until we've got bits so small that they're the same width as the edge of the knife. And they can't be cut anymore unless we can find a finer knife. And so when we get down to that bit beyond which there is no bitter, it is called in Greek atomos, which means the first letter A means non, tomos, cuttable. And so the word atom means that smallest particle of the world which can't be cut into any smaller particle. That's the original idea of atomism. It went further than that, to the notion that the world was built in the same sort of way that a house could be built of bricks or stones. The world is seen, therefore, as a composite of fundamental particles. Then what remained to be discovered was the laws governing the relationship between these particles. And so naturally one thought of them as little balls. Why balls? Because balls are hard to cut. If you take a ball bearing bearing and hit at it with a sword, it's allowable to jump right off to one side. A cube will submit to being cut, but a ball is very difficult to get at. A very strong form of nature. So people have always tended to consider atoms as balls, especially atoms of liquid. There was a notion, you see, that the atoms of the element of Earth were cubes, because cubes all sit together rather firmly. Liquid, which when you put out, that was balls. Fire was made of, if I remember rightly, pyramids. Air, I can't remember what air was made of. You know what their atoms were shaped like. Maybe sausages or something like that, because air is pretty difficult to get at too. But they had some ideas. But fundamentally, what has influenced Western thought, and still influences Western thought, is the idea of an atom as some sort of fundamental little planetary system. And so these things come into relationship with each other and they bang each other around, as in the game of billiards. And so if we are to understand the world profoundly, we have to find out what are the laws governing the relationship of the atoms. Now, you must understand first of all a principle about what are called laws of nature. We inherit the idea of laws of nature from our theology. And our theology that we've grown up with is in certain ways peculiarly different from the theologies of Oriental peoples. Jewish theology and Christian theology, which have entered very profoundly into the common sense of the average person, have an image of the world which is quite basically political, and we'll go further than that and say it's monarchical. It's based on the idea that the world is a construct evoked out of nothingness by the commandment of a celestial king. Now, there may be Jews in this room who are practicing and devout Jews, and there may be Christians in this room who are practicing and devout Christians. And I don't want to offend you by any imagery that I choose or remarks that I may make about this imagery, because I don't suppose that anybody has come to this room and to this particular place who is either a practicing or Christian Jew who has what I would call a naive idea of God. But the funny thing is about our ideas of God is that our symbols, the images, the mythological forms which we use to describe God, have an extremely powerful influence on our feelings and on the way we behave. After all, I was a member of the Church of England when I was a small boy, and that had a very powerful effect on me. And in the Church of England, it's quite obvious, from an emotional point of view, as distinct from a very intellectual point of view, that God stands behind the King of England. And the King of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the whole hierarchy of lords and ladies and noblemen and officials who descend from this point are somehow involved, at any rate this is perfectly clear to a small boy, are somehow involved with the hierarchy of heaven. Because at morning prayer, to which we went every Sunday, the minister would pray a prayer which began, O Almighty Father, high and mighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon earth. Most heartily we beseech thee with thy favour to behold our most gracious sovereign Lord King George, etc. And so this was a very courtly procedure at which the clergyman, dressed in his proper robes, proceeded to the altar, which is a kind of earthly symbol of the throne of heaven, made due obeisance, and presented this petition with all proper humility. Now, these are things that if you're brought up in that environment, you take for granted. That seems to be the natural attitude to God. But imagine someone coming in from a culture where God is not conceived in the image of kingship. How strange he would find this behavior. There's all this bowing and scraping, because you know very well that places where they bow and scrape and where there are thrones are places of terror. Because anybody who rules by force is must be basically terrified. That's why he has to have all these protections, why he has to be addressed in the right form of language. So you go into a court today, an ordinary US law court. There is a very strict etiquette. And if you start laughing, the judge will bang the gavel and threaten contempt of court and all sorts of dire punishments. Because here, everybody has to be serious. It's like on the parade ground. All those Marines lined up, you know, and they salute the flag, and they have to have a very grim expression on it. Serious. And so, in the courts of kings, they have to be serious because kings are afraid of laughter. They're also afraid of being attacked suddenly. So everybody has to kneel down. Because if you kneel down or prostrate yourself, you're at a disadvantage. When the king stands or sits at his throne with his bodyguards ranged on either side, be like that. We've already got the form of a church. The bishop at his throne, his attendant canons and clergy flanking him on either side. And so certain great Catholic cathedrals are called basilica. And basilica, from the Greek, basileus or basilus, is the king. So the basilica is the court of the king. The very titles of God in the Bible, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, are of course borrowed from the Persian emperors. Osiris, that's the Greek word, Kyrios, meaning Lord. So the Mass begins with the invocation, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy upon us. The titles are borrowed from the Persian emperor. And so the rites that have become associated with Christian religion are reflections of those great autocratic monarchs of the ancient Near East, the Cyruses of Persia, the pharaohs of Egypt, and people like Hammurabi, who were the great Chaldean monarchs. The universe was conceived then as being ruled on a political pattern. Like that, so that Hammurabi in particular, and Moses after him, they were the wise ones who laid down the rules. They were the patriarchs who said, now this is the way everybody's got to behave. And since you can't all agree among yourselves as to what the rules are going to be, I'm going to tell you what to do. And since I'm the toughest guy around here, and I got these brothers of mine who are pretty tough too, we're going to say this is the law, see, and you've got to obey. So this is how we have got historically the idea of there being a law of nature. That somebody told nature what to do. For example, a wonderful poem by Father Feening about bees. God, to some sticky stuff not yet alive in a hive, said, come, hum, be my bee and buzz as I bid. And sure enough, it was, and it did. See, and in the beginning, let there be light. A commandment. So commandment is the fundamental idea. So the quest of the law of nature is the quest for the true understanding of the Word of God. For by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is that word? If we could find out the Word of God, here is the idea, you see, we could perform incredible magic. That's why, for example, the name of God in the Bible is not to be uttered except once by the high priest in the Holy of Holies, once a year. Otherwise, that name, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh in Hebrew, we don't really know how it was pronounced. And Jehovah mixes up those consonants with the vowels of Adonai. And it's all mixed up in translation. But anyway, Jehovah is a polite way of saying what can't be said. Because if you know the word, if you know the name of God, you have power. You have the power of God. And so all ancient ideas of magic were based on knowing the names of God. It is said that there are 100 names of God, and 99 are revealed to us. And the camel knows the 100th name, which is why he looks so sniffy. But so also, a person in what we now call primitive orders of society are loath to reveal their names. Because if I know your true name, I can utter it and have power over you. Now, you say, well, that seems a very naive idea, but it is exactly through the knowledge of names that we have Western science. And that is magic. That is through trying to understand the laws of nature. So that if you could understand the word, underneath all the phenomena, you could change the phenomena and create magic. Only this, that many scientists have got rather sophisticated and have realized that the word comes later than the event. That in the beginning wasn't the word. Of course, if you want to make new sense out of the phrase in the beginning was the word, you have to go to Hinduism, where they have the idea that Vak, V-A-C in Sanskrit, or speech, is the basis of creation. But by this, they fundamentally mean vibration. As sound, you see, is... They say that is, you see, if you listen to sound and go right down into it, fundamentally get what sound is all about, you understand the whole mystery of things. Because the whole mystery of things is vibrating energy. On and off. Simple as that. Life and death. Life is on, death is off. Have to have off, have on, have to have on, have off. It's quite a relief. But there they say that's the beginning. Now, but they also say, in another sense, on another level, that the roots of Sanskrit, say the root form, say the word Buddha, comes from the root form bud, which means to know or to be awake. Bhava, which means becoming, comes from the root bhu, which means to grow. So karma, doing, comes from the root kri, to act. So they say, though, that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots of a language, they're the roots of life. Because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic reactions to what happens. In the words of Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head. And we, through this, build up all sorts of weird notions. We say, for example, well, one day you'll have to die. Have to. What's the emotional content of saying you'll have to die? It means it's going to be something imposed upon you against your will. So it's put in this passive mood, have to. You will be compelled to die. But I can't be compelled to die unless I'm fighting it. Supposing I want to die. Supposing I commit suicide. Or supposing we look at it all in another way and say, when I get a disease and die as a result of it, getting a disease is something I do. Just as much as taking a walk. Only we've got our thoughts arranged so that we say, you ought not to get a disease. Even if it's just plain old age. Somehow, you ought not to do that. You ought to go on. You can't say, when death comes about, I laid me down with a will. Because we've got this hang-up about life being divided into two parts. Things that we do, on the one hand, and things that happen to us on the other. And Buddhists say, what happens to you is your karma. And people don't readily understand that. They think my karma, something awful happened to me because of something bad I did in my last life. And therefore, I've got bad karma. Karma simply means your doing, your action. So that when something that happens to me is called my karma, it means that it's your own doing. And if you recognize that it's your own doing, it's never bad karma. It's only bad karma if you refuse to admit that it's your own doing and merely blame someone or something else that it's something that happened to you. Now, I digressed a little because what I was getting at was the meaning of the law of nature. The laws of nature. The word taken over, the idea of the law of nature was taken over by Western science from this ancient magical notion of the word of God, the commandment of God, being the foundation for everything that happens in the world. But now, today, in Western 20th century science, there is an entirely new idea of the law of nature. The laws of nature are not things that exist in any real sense, which phenomena, like the motion of stars or the behavior of animals and rocks, they're not phenomena which these things obey. The universe is doing its stuff. But because we have a certain kind of structure and brain, we want to make sense of it. And therefore, we find various ways of understanding the world by the principle of regularity. Now what's that? Let's take a clock. A clock ticks regularly. But the world does not tick regularly. Inconveniently enough, the sun does not have the earth go around it in a neat 360 days. This has always irritated calendar makers. How to make a rational calendar? There is no solution. Because the rotations of the earth upon its own axis do not neatly synchronize with its rotation around the sun. There's always something a little odd about it. So what we do is we superimpose over this rather odd elliptical path the ideal figure of a circle with its 360 degrees. Now that is also like putting a ruler along a piece of wood and saying this piece of wood can be cut to 12 inches. Now there are no inches in the wood. Inches are a method, a technique that human beings have invented for measuring things. And so we can cut out a piece of cloth or a trunk of a tree so many feet. Well, originally, it's simply comparing the trunk with us by putting our feet over it one after another, saying it's so many feet long, or so many spans when you stretch out the hand. There's a fundamental idea of measurement, and the inch is, of course, one joint. Not sure kind of joint. And so, this comparison of man's body and its regular shape. You see, 10 fingers on either side. 5 fingers on either side makes 10. 5 toes on the other side makes 10. And so by stretching ourselves out, as it were, against nature, we measured it. And the idea of this, of measurement, is the same idea as the idea of the law of nature. A law of nature is exactly the same kind of thing as a ruler, or a hammer, or a saw. It is a way of thinking which enables us to control our environment. By observing regularities, and then by making a calculus, which is a process really of betting. Will it be regular next time? And the odds are that it may be. If it's done it once this way, it's likely to do it again that way. So in this way, you predict eclipses of the sun. You predict the phases of the moon. You measured them. You counted how it went, how often it did it like this, how often it did it like that. And you say, well, it keeps on doing it. And you think, well, fascinating. It seems to obey me, because now I can tell you any time it's going to come up. And if the other people around haven't figured it out, they think I'm magic, because I'm going to say to them, the moon is going to change at such and such a time. So many days from now, it's going to have a different shape. And they say, my God, he was right. And they'll think I'm making it happen, because I can do that. And so I get a rather privileged position, because I could predict. But that's the basic idea, you see, of the law of nature. The law of nature is a human network, like the lines of celestial latitude and longitude. They don't exist in the heavens, but we project them on the sky in order to measure the positions of the stars, because the stars are scattered in a very confusing way. And just try and remember that mess and figure it out. So the clever ones, you see, just look at it through a network, a spherical network. You can number all the squares in the spherical network in accordance with the principles of the circle, the 360 degrees. You throw the network on the sky. It isn't really there, see. Then to help you a little further, pick out some of the big stars and see if they make a shape. You know, this is like doing a Rorschach test. And you see, oh look, there's one over there that looks like a dipper. Or some people call it a plow. And there's one there that looks like a cross. There's one there that by some extreme wangling can be made to look like a virgin. And all these lines that have joined the constellations together are our ways of projecting a pattern upon this great and glorious confusion, so that we can remember it and chart it. But obviously, you can very well see that if you looked at this same pattern of stars from some completely different position in space, all those constellations and their arrangements would vanish. You'd have to invent a new one, because there is nowhere where the stars really are. It depends where you're looking from. So in this sense, then, man in nature, with his extraordinary symmetrical brain and its amazing complications, figures it out. And it's man who introduces the law into the world. He invents it. But in a way, invenire, to invent, is to discover. But what we discover, in a way, is not something that's out there. When we invent the laws of nature, we are discovering something about ourselves and our own passion for prediction, for regularity, for keeping things under control. Therefore, there has to be a law. So then, going back right now to the beginning of what I started to say. The question was then, what is the law of relationship between the atoms? Between the fundamental billiard balls of which the world is composed? Well, you watch the game of billiards, and there's a cue, and it hits that ball, and then it moves over, and it hits that one, and then that hits that one, and then that hits that one. And so the final ball, which moves into the pocket, has its behavior explained through its contact with the other billiard balls and the final contact with the cue. That's why it did it. And so this view of the world as something that happens by the mechanical processes of the law of cause and effect is one that is really basic to most people's common sense today, to most educated people. They would say it's very difficult to figure it all out because the whole thing is so complicated. But if you could know all the details involved in, say, the behavior or a single act of a human being, you would find that it was the ineluctable result of a series of bouncing balls against each other, fundamental atoms that predisposed the great final event to be just like that. So that theory of the relationship between the atoms is called, in technical language, catenary. C-A-T-E-N-A-R-Y, catenary. A catenary effect, or a relationship between events, is like, for example, to use another illustration, where you stand a row of bricks up, end up, no? And you knock over the first one, and they all go cata, 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 and fall down. That is a catenary sequence. But it becomes increasingly obvious today to the physicist and to the biologist that that will not do as a sufficient description of how various events affect each other. And so there's another type of causal relationship altogether, which is called, instead of catenary, reticulate. R-E-T-I-C-U-L-A-T-E, reticulate, from the Latin rete, meaning a net relationship. Wherein, in other words, any given event is not simply ascribed to one or more previous events, but that the relationship between the past and the present, and between the present and the future, is all to be taken into consideration in understanding any one event. In other words, let's take one event. I drop a ball and it bounces. Let's say it's an event. I don't know how many events it really is, but we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that it's an event. Now, is it enough in describing this event to say, I let the ball go, it obeyed the law of gravity and hit the floor, but because it was made of rubber and had some air inside it, it bounced, and sort of slightly disobeyed gravity because it had an energy in it. But that's not enough. Because that the ball dropped, that I let it go, that it bounced, depended not merely upon a historical sequence of events that you can lay out in a string along a line of time. It depends also upon a present context. There must be a certain density of air. All kinds of things have to coexist with this in order for me to be there to drop the ball at all, much less manufacture a ball. So that what happens must be considered not merely as a historical phenomenon, but it must be seen in context. Context is terribly important because it isn't just when a thing happens that is important, it's where it happens. In what setting? So that you could say that my blood in my veins is in a certain setting. In a test tube, it's in a completely different setting. And in a test tube, my blood is not behaving in the way it behaves in my veins. Therefore, it's not the same thing. So, an individual person in one setting will behave in one way, in another setting in a completely different way. I remember when I was a child. I was one boy when I was at home with my parents. When I went to visit my uncle and aunt, I was someone different. When I was with my peers, I was someone quite different. Because I changed according to the setting, and children are very well aware of this. It's only as we go on that we keep having it drummed into our heads that we ought to have a consistent character, because we're influenced by novels, where the characters are supposed to be consistent. And so you want to have a consistent character. You want to behave the same in all circumstances and towards all people. That merely means you become inflexible. So what things are, therefore, depend on the context in which they're found, on their network relationship to everything else that's going on. And one of the reasons for this, which is going to lead us to something more profound but much simpler, is, of course, that the whole notion of a thing, or of an event in nature, and of causal relationships between different things and different events, is a purely abstract idea that does not really fit the facts of nature at all. In nature, in this physical world that you feel when you hold your head, or hold somebody's hand, or just breathe, in that world, there aren't any separate events. Not whatever. Sure, there are all sorts of wiggles around here, all sorts of lines, all sorts of colors, all sorts of surfaces, all sorts of forms. But they're not separate. Because you see, you can't separate an inside, what you are inside your skin, from the outside of the skin. Because you can see that once if there weren't anything outside your skin, there'd be no inside. It takes the outside and the inside working together to create this situation. Now, in the simplest way, the situation that I call my body wouldn't be operating unless there was air around here to breathe. This physical phenomenon goes with the situation of there being air. Now, true, it wiggles about inside the air in a rather complicated way. And other people watching say, oh, something going on over there. No, because the air you can't see, and it remains rather constant, except when there's a gale. And so you don't pay much attention to it, because it's always around. What you pay attention to is what changes rather rapidly. And you say, well, that's a that. Say, hey, you say to someone, you see the change going on, something we go over there and say, what's that? See? And he knows what you mean by a that. A that means something on the end of a finger point. It's different, it's peculiar, see? And that's a that. So from that comes the idea of an event, or a thing, a that. But all these that's that are happening aren't disconnected. They go with each other, just as I go with the surrounding air. And just as this whole situation in which we are at this moment is a complicated going withness. Now here then we get to the fundamental idea of this idea of going with. And from this we shall be able to construct the whole notion of network. And this is the idea I said at the beginning. It is extremely simple, but very difficult for people brought up to use Western languages to understand. Now going withness, we could call it relativity, relationship. Means simply, let me first of all put it in a very extreme form. Consider yourself, sitting here at this moment, being just exactly the sort of person you are. Maybe a little neurotic, maybe a little sick physically, maybe a little ashamed of yourself for some reason or other, or whatever. You know? Just the way you are anyway, just like that, sitting here. That situation goes with, as back goes with front, the entire situation of the rest of the universe. Now, you, as you are, exactly the way you are, and you really don't know what that is. You may have some opinions about it, but you really don't know. That goes with the way the whole of the rest of boundless being is arranged. Now, it isn't that the way the rest of boundless being is arranged is determining you to be the way you are. Or if it is that, if that's true, if it determines you, then we must also allow the other side of the picture that you determine it.
Teach. Justice.
It's your karma. You did it. But you say, no, but I didn't help it. It did me. And you can say, tis, tisn't, tis, tisn't, tis, tisn't, like two children arguing until you realize that the argument was stupid. Because you and the rest of it controlling
Put
you.
cat in jail.
It's all
Punish. Teach. Justice. Law.
As Tyler Chardin said, the whole universe is the only true, the only truly indivisible whole. The human being, though, finds this difficult to understand because we're always telling each other, now you should. You want to change? Don't be like that. Now listen, you're sick. Now I got a system. See, I got a system. I've got a real school here, a thing that's very important. And you should come and study with that. It may not be mine, but it may be some big sage or pundit that I know. And you should come around and study that. And I've thought about this for a long time. Because I've heard every kind of opinion of all the sorts of things that I should do in order to get myself into shape. And I realized that if I followed this advice, I would spend my entire day doing exercises in preparation for life. I don't know when I'll ever get around to that. But, you know, I would have my half an hour's yoga practice, 1 hour of zazen, so much physical exercises and so much memory practice, so much special diet preparation to be sure that I got proper food. And if I think this all through, I think, oh my God, it's worth it. Then another school of thought.
Do it, yeah, do it.
Just do one thing, see? Just, but then then I say, now how am I going to choose which one I'm going to do? Well, he says, obviously this one's the best. And before you know where you are, you're sewed up by some religious fanatic. Now, please, I don't want to do this to you. Please don't think that I have any such recipe that I'm going to give you anything to do for 5 minutes every morning. I just am not. I want to, my whole notion would be to set you all free so that you'd only have to attend one seminar, never have to come back. That's the idea, really. Because I know that so far as my own livelihood is concerned, that there are always more people. No, I don't collect a following. I just send them all away. There are plenty more people to fill the vacuum. But this is the whole idea that we're going to work on of a net. That you are like a dewdrop on a multidimensional spider's web early in the morning.
Massive caps.
And if you look at that thing carefully, you will see that in every dewdrop are the reflections of all the other dewdrops. So the way that dewdrop looks goes with the way all the other ones look. See? The particular glimmer in it and so on. Its peculiar position, and everybody has to have a peculiar position in the cosmos. The reflections in every one of them are different, according to the position they're in and the other dewdrops that they reflect at such and such angles. But nevertheless, the whole network, all the dewdrops, depend on each individual dewdrop. And each individual dewdrop mutually depends on all the others. And that's the sort of a scheme we're living in. And there's a bit of frontal logic at first, because we say, I can understand that I depend on this universe, because after all I need sunlight and air and water and the help of the society and all that kind of thing. I needed a father and mother. But looking at it from the other point of view, I find it very difficult to see how the whole thing depends on me. And that's because we've been brought up with the put-down theory of the individual. No, children should be seen and not heard. You are the servant and subject of God, and don't you ask impertinent questions. Or another way of putting us down is to say, well, you're just a piece of a fluke in a mindless mechanism. See? We always managed not to find out that the relationship of the network is mutual, it runs both ways. That it depends on you, just as much as you depend on it. Because you see, it's you, with your ingenious brain, that, for example, turns vibrations of air into sound. You turn whatever the sun is doing into light. You turn whatever the air is doing into a sky called blue. There is only blue for a brain. It's just like if you hit a drum and it's got no skin, it won't make any noise. So it's the tight skin that evokes the noise out of a moving fist. No skin, no noise. So you, as the reflector, like the dewdrop reflects, you, as the so-called reflector of all that goes on, by the constitution of what kind of a reflector you are, you evoke what we call sun, moon, and stars, nebulae. Vast spaces. They're not vast in relation to you. They're not really vast. And if you compare them with yourself, they're vast. They could be considered very tiny. Or equally, the space between two sides of a hair could be considered vast, if you want to think about it that way. I mean, if you really want to go into a hair, there's an awful lot between one diameter of a hair, you know. And if you think about it a long time, you'll think it's what we call a vast subject. So, now, from microscopy, it is a vast subject. Depends on the attitude, you see. But the basic principle, the thing I really want to try and get across, is this idea of going with. The universe around you is your outside, just as much as the organs inside your skin are your inside. You go with it in the same way that the stalk goes with the root, or with the flower. And as front goes with back, as North Pole of magnet goes with South Pole. This principle of relationship governs everything. I wouldn't say governs. I'm only using these wretched terms that we have to use out of our language. It underlies everything. And it's important to realize, and let me repeat this, that the great universe does not control the small individual any more than the small individual actually controls the great universe. This is not a question of controlling. It is a question of more like dancing, of what happens, rather than what makes it happen. See, things aren't made to happen. Only if you insist that a certain event is quite separate, then you can think of it being made to happen by the events that came before it. But if you realize they're all parts of one event, or different aspects, different phases of one event, then you see it happening and you don't see anything making it happen. Forcing. That whole idea of things being made to happen, in other words, goes back to the idea of a universe that is based on a monarchical image, where the boss says, damn it, you do that, and the thing can't help it, and so it's made to happen. I'd say in Chinese Taoist philosophy, the universe is just not seen in that way. It's not seen as anything is not made to happen. It is what does happen. But it's all interrelated. And therefore there is a pattern to it. There is an order to it. The order of the net. I was talking in last night's session about the nature of networks. And you remember that I explained the two different conceptions of causal relations between things and events. And I may as well write these down unless you've forgotten. There's the catenary and the reticulate. In this kind, things and events are explained as being links in a causal chain. And so every particular happening that is identified as a thing or an event, which is, however, quite an arbitrary kind of selection, is explained by its past, by the chain of events which lead to it in a causal sequence. On the other hand, in thinking of the reticulate relationship, a thing is explained not simply by its relationship to past events, but by its context, that is to say, its relationship to present and future events as well as past, so that every event becomes something in a network. Now, you will very well understand that when you see the knots in a network, or better, the squares of the net, they're all held together by each other. Imagine the kind of network where instead of there being, something like knitting, in knitting the stitches are all held together by each other, and if something breaks at one point, the thing starts raveling. So the reticulate view, or the net view of the universe, is one in which the Buddhists say everything mutually interpenetrates everything else. So as I was trying to make the central point, the point of implication, the point of relativity, that things go together like two sticks standing on the ground in this way. See? They give each other mutual support. Or like the three rings in the Ballantine beer trademark, or the Christian symbol of the Holy Trinity. Those rings interlock. But take one of them away, and the interlocking is broken down for all of them. So in the same way, the individual, although seeming to be something that rattles around in the universe, although a given planet or a given star seems to be something that is moving on its own, the motion, the behavior of stars, is a situation that arises only because of the mutual interdependence of all stars. Because, to take a very simple illustration, if there is only one star in the whole universe, no motion can be ascribed to it. It can't even be said to be still. Nobody knows what it's doing, because there's nothing for it to relate to. But take two stars, and they can get nearer to each other or further away from each other. But no one knows which is moving. Get three stars, and then you have, say, two close together, and one of them seems to go away. Now, who is moving away from who? Are the two stars saying, hey, we don't like you, we're going to get out of your way? Or are they saying to the other star, why don't you like us? Why do you keep going away? Well, who's right? Well, you could say on the principle of democracy that the majority must be right. But then they say, well, let's have an umpire, and we have a fourth star who can stand above us. You see, two stars can only move in a straight line with respect to each other. Three stars can move in a plane with respect to each other, but a fourth star can establish a third dimension. But we can say, I can look down on you and take an objective standpoint. But then the argument is which one of them is the fourth. But that's the basic principle on which the whole universe is constructed. It's a relativity system in which motion depends on comparison with something relatively still. And there can't be any motion at all unless there is that comparison. So, because of this relationship, every individual is so related to everything else that's going on that you imply it. In other words, anybody who was a great scientist from some other world altogether, who studied a human body carefully and figured out the conditions under which such a thing would exist, he would come to the conclusion that that human body was something from a universe just such as we have. He would find that your structure and your behavior implied this whole thing. Just as with a laser beam system, you can photograph a small fragment of any photographic negative, and from that tiny fragment you can reconstruct the whole picture from which it was taken, because the crystalline tensions in that fragment imply the whole context of crystalline tensions that belong to that particular negative. So in exactly the same way, you as an individual imply this world, and this world mutually implies you. And you are a natural formation, moving in and with this universe, not determined by it, because this is not a system of determinism. But you are moving with it in just the same harmonious way that you notice the waves moving, and the trees growing, and the clouds moving. And as you don't accuse the clouds of making aesthetic mistakes, so really is the certain light in which you can see human beings, both good and bad, as perfect forms of nature. You may have fashionable discriminations about who is beautiful and who is ugly. You may have metaphysical discriminations about who is sick and who is healthy. You may have moral discriminations about who is good and who is evil. But these are all points of view, relative points of view. They're all legitimate because they are parts of the functioning of the whole. The fact that you take those points of view, that too is part of nature. But a skillful person lives on two levels at once. You live basically on the level where you know there are no mistakes. Can't be. Everything moves in accordance with what the Chinese call the Tao, the way of nature. And if you have that basic feeling, you will always be sane. But you are able to comprehend within that feeling a more restricted point of view, whereby things are good and bad. Just as in the confines of this room and this area, it's perfectly clear that there's a difference between the up direction and the down direction. But we know that this area is situated in interstellar space, and there is no up and no down. Now, the second situation doesn't contradict the first. But if you have only the discriminatory point of view, if you take your fundamental stand as a being on the difference between good and evil, you get in the Christian hang-up. You have then to say that there is eternal heaven and eternal hell, that the distinction between good and evil is radical. And if you do that, you begin to suffer from a disease called chronic guilt, which is one of the most destructive emotions that anybody can have. You feel an outcast from the universe, at odds with reality itself, at odds with God. And that sends people quite mad, and is responsible for a good deal of the craziness of Western civilization. It's making too much of a good thing out of the distinction between good and evil. It is an important distinction, but it's not fundamentally important. And you have to learn to admit different degrees of importance. And just say that because you can't just say that because a certain distinction isn't absolute, that it's not important. After all, your own physical formation is not absolute, but it's important. So, the situation of man in this network is to repeat the proposition. On the one hand, that he as an organism, psychophysical organism, is something that the whole cosmos is doing. That was as much of truth, I think, as there is in modern astrology, which I regard as a pseudoscience. But it is based on a very fundamental principle, that when you draw a map of a person's soul, you draw a small picture of the universe, a very crude picture. And that is the design of that person's individuality. The truth is, therefore, that your soul is something which contains your body. Your body does not have the soul inside it like a spook. And the whole cosmos is your soul. So the cosmos is doing you at the point you call here and now. reciprocally, you are doing it. And the one depends upon the other. You have difficulty in conceiving this as a Westerner, because we have all been brainwashed by several centuries of put-down theories of man. That you were A, the wretched little subject, and a disobedient one at that, of an eternal king, and B, that you were just a fortuitous congress of atoms in a mindless mechanism of incredible vastness. Having entertained those two theories of man and of existence for so many centuries, we are very much brainwashed into being unable to see that we and the universe are mutually causative, or to use the Chinese expression, mutually arising. Now then, a second difficulty arises in this, which requires that I bring in some ideas, first of all, from Buckminster Fuller. The principal notion of Buckminster Fuller's thought, and if you don't know this name, Buckminster Fuller is what I would call a philosophical engineer. A man who is one of the most creative minds in the modern world. He invented the geodesic dome, which is his main claim to economic fame. But beyond that, he's done a great deal of extremely fascinating thinking about the future of technology and the situation of man in the universe. And he has devised this important term, synergy, coming from the Greek, syn, with, ergos, work. But what he means by synergy is this, that every complex organism has as a whole an intelligence greater than any one of its parts. But this is a difficult idea to swallow, because he applies it to technology in this way. He is saying that the industrial natural complex in which we live is something that is going in a certain direction on its own, whether you like it or not. And that it is able to organize your behavior.
Answer my question, Mr. Trump. Did you conduct acts of war on an obviously far more advanced species?
That the increasing complexity of the industrial complex will of itself, say, outlaw such lunacy as war. It will make it impossible. And that we shall find ourselves increasingly organized by an intelligent system that is not under our conscious direction, but will make us feel, I suppose, rather as our individual selves feel inside our bodies. He gives an illustration. The transportation communications network, aircraft, radio, television, telephone, these taken together are constituting a global net, which might be said to be something like Teilhard de Chardin's idea of the noosphere. I hope you all read Teilhard de Chardin, the famous Jesuit theologian, who wrote the best of his books is The Phenomenon of Man. The Earth, which is the geosphere, from the Greek geos, geese, the Earth. Then the Earth, as a geosphere, is covered with a biosphere. That is the sphere of living organisms. The biosphere, in turn, generates the noosphere, which is the communication network that we call the mind, through literature, through speech, through radio and television communication. The noosphere is slowly realized. So, Buckminster Fuller is really talking about the same thing. The noosphere is the network of communication set up by technology. And so, for example, let's just take air transportation. As a result of jet plane.
Yo, what up, Arches? I'm listening to this Alan Watts life-changing wisdom. What are you doing?
I'm eating some yogurt.
Are
You
you
want Jeffy's Island?
Of course, I had the best vacations there. Beautiful beaches, tremendous.
are you eating it with fruit?
Are you friends with Jeffrey?
How about this?
Are you friends with Jeffrey?
How about this?
Right, so
Do you want Jeffy's
Of
Island?
course,
watch it by yourself, I guess.
What?
Why wouldn't you watch this by yourself, or like, or you plan to have a discussion about it after?
Possibly. But I've been listening to it all day. It's like 4 hours long. I think this
That's
almost
great.
it's almost my second time going through it. The end of it is very interesting. there's a lot of things we could discuss about it, but I would just say, like, experience it. And one of the interesting things in this is he says, don't even think about it. Just let your mind respond naturally in a way. So this whole thing is just like a meditation. But you can go to ChicagoMayorElection.com to see all of my political campaign creation videos. But this is really
So this
just
is like you're actually running for the Chicago mayoral
yeah,
race.
yeah,
Okay, I didn't know, like you remember when you came on C2 Radio?
yeah.
Yeah, that's where I know you from.
Oh, I see.
They weren't sure if you were serious or not. There wasn't much time to really establish that, I guess.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is I just come into these rooms to basically sound troll people because like they're just wasting their time. I mean, you know,
What do you mean they're wasting?
they're just wasting. They're not doing any kind of like education or research. They're just like doing hyperbolic political speech. They're not interested in books or music or poetry or politics per se. You know, they're part of a vulgar society that can't communicate with actual voters or families. They are rated NC-17.
Well, yeah, they don't plan on working in the de facto system. They plan on waiting for the federal government to collapse and they can establish their militias.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to happen. The federal government, though scaling in size, is not going to collapse. So that is just you know, it's just an opinion. Is it an opinion or is it a fact? Which one
Well,
is it?
it's obvious everything's an opinion. I don't.
Oh my God! Well, at least we confirmed somebody. At least I can finally met somebody who can confirm that everything is an opinion. Finally! Oh my God! It's been weeks. Oh my God! Fucking finally, one brain in the universe has confirmed that everything's a fucking opinion. Finally! Finally! Woo!
You're welcome.
Oh, thank God. There's a brain out there that has confirmed that not. You know, what's the difference between an opinion and a fact?
I don't know honestly.
You don't know?
Yeah, I wouldn't know the answer to that. I mean, I'm sure there's like some sensible answer to that. I don't think I can give you one. I mean, I guess like, because you're talking about like on a deep philosophical level, so I don't know if I'm gonna go in like some direction I don't mean to go in.
Well, what's interesting is the word fact and faked are, you know, like a similar, like connection. So I'm just saying that a lot of people on these apps, they're never doing meditation. Some people, a lot of the religious people who run these Christian rooms, they just want to be moderator control freaks in like their universe. And it's kind of funny because it kind of is like a genie in a bottle system with these cell phones where you can pop in and out of rooms, you know, and you're like in a 3D simulator. You can say or create any kind of sound you want, you know. I mean, you will get kicked from the room or kicked to the, you know, to the listening area, but it's like a game. It's like a video game in a way. You know, people don't like the way I use my cell phones, and I'm like, okay, well, do you go to the casino and play the slot machines? Because you must like paying to play for video games. That's kind of what I'm trying to show people is, you know, you aren't what you say you are what you do, basically. It's more important what you do. And so your communication should, you know, align with what you're doing. And that's what I'm doing right now. Ding!
Or do you have congruence? experience of Alan Watts.
You know, I was thinking today, it's like as soon as you start talking about Alan Watts, within like just a couple minutes, somebody will say, he was an alcoholic. And then those 4 words, like, shut down 1,000 recorded hours of how he spent his life. You know? It's like, it's just...
Try to find something to discredit, you know?
Well, I mean, if you are just going to let the conversation shut down like that, like, it's still something to bring up, but it's just so stupid because the guy was a recording artist. He was a publisher. Yeah. And the Alan Watts Foundation is a multi-million dollar, nonprofit organization. So he created a significant library and recording industry, but it's also the intelligence about what he's talking about. And part of me, to me, the big picture about the Enlightenment perspective is that you're actually like a nice person to everybody, even the worst people, you know, because it is a little bit like royalty training, you know, like how does a king, you know, live his life? He doesn't live with it in like disgust or anger. It's basically Stoic philosophy. So I'm just saying, in a lot of these spaces, you know, you are communicating with, and myself included, many times, you know, I'm just like being insanely vulgar, profane, abusive, or hate speech, and it's like that's not what the message is in the literature. Like there's a reason why people study stuff. It's to like transform your intelligence and consciousness, and you know, help you not repeat mistakes of the past or wasted time and effort. You know, like every second counts, basically, is what I'm saying. And to spend time in rooms and to listen to people where it's like, if you were to analyze how you were spending your seconds, you'd say, okay, I'm not going to risk spending my seconds listening to these types of people anymore. I would much rather just listen to somebody like Alan Watts, who can give me the programming that I think is of the highest value. So in this lecture, he talks about crowd communication versus group communication. And the television was a one-way programming stream, you know, for so long. But now we, the programmed, can now broadcast our own programming. So it's a unique opportunity to create content and redistribute this high-value content to people who, in my opinion, are wasting a lot of time with very low-quality content. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of what you're saying, like the medium of public speaking. It's kind of obviously shifted over years, and it's brought about, calls for different ways of preparation.
Not preparation, experience. That's what Alan Watts keeps talking about, is the happening and the experience. And I like to play games, you know? Like Alan Watts says, you should basically be like a dolphin or be like a monkey swinging through the trees. Like you're weightless. You don't want to be held down by, friction. And that's what a lot of these online conversations are, is very friction. And just listening to them, in my opinion, causes me personal friction because I know that every second counts. And I'm wasting my time listening to these crazy people on the internet and some of the most obnoxious sounding people you've ever heard in your life. It sounds like fingernails scratching on a chalkboard or a truck engine, grinding its gears, or a person being put into a wood chipper and screaming bloody murder.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. A lot of these interlocutors are not very kind or pleasant to be around.
No, I want to study poetry. I want to play music. You know, like I want to be a recording artist in the same way that Alan Watts was. Alan Watts in this lecture talks about guru economics and how all major religions, including guruism, has an economy and a different methodology on how to generate that economy. But he also talks about a lot of different things. But anyways, do you want to say anything else? Because I'm gonna go back to playing Alan Watts.
What do you mean, like, there's like a specific way to develop that economy? Is it necessary? Is it like good for the economy? There's a guru economy, or like.
He was talking about the law of abundance or prosperity or growth. Like, how do you create economic activity and growth? And a lot of it is like cloning and filling up capacity. And we have so much capacity in this country. It's unbelievable how much capacity we have. I can't believe they're building data centers. We have so much commercial real estate that is being sold for 80 cents on the dollar. It's like, why are we building these data centers and like fucking up probably important water when we could just put these data centers in major commercial office space in major cities? Like, what the fuck? I don't understand it, but I think it's just because it's like, it's basically like creating a utility company. Like, these data centers, they'll never go out of business. Like, they'll be here for 100 years. They'll be running when everybody's gone. It's just a joke.
So, like, I mean, when you say, like, are you kind of talking about the law of attraction, like this abundance?
My theory is that, like, if you look at successful music recording artists, you know, who sold 30 million records, 100 million records, 2 billion records, and you were to analyze their music, and then the media that they created in addition, you know, so it's like Michael Jackson, his music is successful because of the content and because of like the hypnosis of the music itself. So part of business is it's the biggest part of your business is always marketing and being able to find an audience to convert them into